In a 1943 letter to S.A. Burgess, Dale Morgan wrote, "I think Joseph Smith was a man subjected to a singular environmental pressure, and that his behavior must be interpreted as the effect of this pressure upon distinctive psychophysiological components of his character." This essay will argue that the singular environmental pressure motivating Smith's behavior came primarily from his own family, and that Smith began his religious career, in part, to resolve family conflict. An examination of Joseph Smith in the context of his family environment has been largely neglected, and his relationship with his parents barely explored. Since the late 1950s, family therapists have become increasingly aware of the importance of understanding the individual within the context of his or her family of origin. My approach to Joseph Smith is informed by family systems theory, which views the family as an organism-like system that seeks to maintain emotional equilibrium, or homeostasis. This approach should be distinguished from traditional Freudian psychoanalysis or psychodynamic analysis of the individual, for it seeks instead to understand the individual in the context of family and is more a sociological study of the family system. Ivan Bazor-Minyi-Nagy and James L. Framo explain the important insights gleaned from this approach to the family. A turning point in psychiatric thinking was achieved when it was realized that symptoms serve to balance forces within the family as well as intrapsychic forces. A deep, unconscious, multi-person motivational structure was found to exist in every family. Behavior, rather than being determined solely by an individual's own psychic forces, was found to be determined in part by the motive systems of important others, who could gratify or frustrate. It was learned that there is always cross-complicity in what people do to each other, and the giving, getting, and withholding is reciprocal. Family therapists began to get some inkling of the interlocking homeostatic system of the family and how, in extremely intricate fashion, the interpsychic struggles were blended into a transactional whole. If one family member got better, another one had to balance the system and get sick. In a dysfunctional family, a family where one or both of the parents are emotionally impaired, the family system seeks balance in neurotic or even pathological ways. An imbalance between the parents greatly affects the family system, especially the children, who usually seek to save the marriage. Again, Bazor-Minyi-Nagy and Framo explain. There are a number of typical family problems which appear repeatedly. One of the most common results from the parents being so overwhelmed with their introjects that there is essentially no marriage, and the children, for their own survival, are engaged in attempts to save their parents' marriage. I would argue that the marriage relationship of Joseph Smith's parents, Lucy and Joseph Sr., like so many marriages, was essentially dysfunctional, that it was marked by religious conflict and severe financial burden, and that this had occurred even before Joseph Jr.'s birth on the 23rd of December, 1805 in Sharon, Vermont. It was Joseph Sr.'s ginseng misadventure and inept business management that caused their store in Randolph to collapse, eventually forcing them to sell their Tunbridge farm, probably in 1803 or 1804, to liquidate their debts. Their marriage in 1796 had begun with favorable circumstances, having property given them by Asaph Smith and a present of $1,000 by Lucy's brother and business partner. Already overextended financially, Joseph Sr. unwisely chose to invest all his proceeds on a ginseng venture to China, rather than pay his creditors in the usual fashion. It was a gamble, and he lost. Left penniless and propertyless, Joseph and Lucy took refuge on her father's land in Sharon. If Lucy did not feel some resentment toward her husband, Joseph Sr. was undoubtedly humiliated by the experience. Also, prior to their residence in Sharon, Joseph Sr. and Lucy's differing religious views had surfaced. Under pressure from his father and older brother, Joseph Sr. had requested Lucy to stop attending the local Methodist camp meetings. Lucy obeyed her husband, but later said she was very much hurt by his actions, although at the time she kept her feelings to herself. Lucy likely resented her husband's lack of support, for he had put the feelings of his father and brother before hers. But there was more to their religious differences than Lucy is willing to reveal in her history. Early in their marriage, he, along with his father Asel and eldest brother Jesse, helped found a Universalist society in Tunbridge, Vermont. Although he may have at times flirted with Methodism, he was seriously committed to Universalist doctrine. Son William wrote that his father's belief in universal salvation often brought him in contact with the advocates of the doctrine of endless misery. Joseph Sr.'s Universalism sharply conflicted with Lucy's New England Puritan leanings, which eventually drew her to the Presbyterian Church. Although vague about her husband's religious beliefs, Lucy nevertheless hinted that there was conflict, stating that in response to her husband's request to discontinue attending the revival meetings, she prayed to the Lord that he would so influence the heart of my husband that he would one day be induced to receive the gospel whenever it was preached. Stripped of its appeal to an LDS audience, the statement reveals Lucy's desire for her own religious views to prevail, and through the Book of Mormon, they eventually did. Contributing to the dysfunctionality of their marriage was Joseph Sr.'s excessive drinking, although Lucy never mentioned it. In fact, he earned the reputation for drinking in Palmyra and later Manchester. His Manchester neighbor, Barton Stafford, said that the senior Smith was a noted drunkard. Palmyra resident Isaac Butts said he had frequently seen old Joe drunk, and Lorenzo Saunders, who knew the Smiths well, remembered in 1884 how Joseph Sr. was always telling yarns. He would go to turkey shoots and get tight, meaning drunk, and he would pretend to put spells on their guns and would tell them they could not shoot a turkey. Martin Harris told of an incident in the fall of 1827 when some Palmyra residents put whiskey into the old man's cider and got him half drunk in order to get him to talk about the discovery of the gold plates. Before his assembled family in 1834, Joseph Sr. expressed some misgivings about his past, both as a father and a husband. I have not always set that example before my family that I ought, he said. I have not been diligent in teaching them the commandments of the Lord, but have rather manifested a light and trifling mind, which has been a cause of grief to my family. His lack of attention to the commandments was likely due, in part, to his belief in universal salvation. When blessing his son Hiram at this family gathering, Joseph Sr. revealed a specific behavior that had distressed his family. Thou hast always stood by thy father, and reached forth the helping hand to lift him up when he was in affliction. And though he has been out of the way through wine, thou hast never forsaken him, nor left him to scorn. Joseph Sr.'s drinking must have been considerable for him to have acknowledged it as a family problem. Certainly, it seriously impaired his ability to connect with others and contributed to his emotional unavailability to his wife and children. Lucy did not complain about her husband's excessive drinking in her history, but Joseph Sr.'s blessing on Hiram implies that he was special in not scorning his father for this weakness. Indeed, one would have expected the Presbyterian part of the family to be especially critical given that church's strict position on temperance. Despite her own difficulties, Lucy was a high-strung, outspoken, take-charge kind of woman who acted as her husband's enabler and emotional caretaker. One finds her in this role even after his death, protecting his memory as she dictated her history in 1845, with either complete silence or carefully constructed excuses. She fails to mention, for instance, that Joseph Sr. was in Pennsylvania looking for treasure with Joseph Jr. and others at the time they lost their Manchester, New York farm in 1825. Instead, she asserts that he was in South Bainbridge and Colesville, New York areas performing legitimate business, that is, attempting to obtain a loan for the next year's wheat harvest. The reality was that Joseph Sr. had unwisely decided, following the death of their land agent in 1822, to invest his money in building a house rather than saving it for the eventual appointment of a new land agent. He took a chance, perhaps counting on Alvin's help. However, with Alvin's death in 1823 and the appointment of a new land agent in 1824, Joseph Sr. again lost everything. He was in his mid-50s, and it was extremely doubtful that he would ever recover from this financial reversal. In many ways, Joseph Sr. was not unlike Lucy's own father, who for many years unsuccessfully sought to obtain riches. I have tried and reached much after property and several times obtained it, Solomon Mack recalled in his autobiography, but by misfortunes, time after time, I lost it. Solomon, like Joseph Sr., was also a Universalist who admittedly neglected the commandments and resisted his Orthodox wife's importunities until his conversion about 1810. And like her mother, Lucy patiently, faithfully, and for the most part silently bore with her situation. In her history, Lucy says very little about her relationship with her father, probably because for a majority of Lucy's childhood he was absent from the home, either serving in the military or traveling on business ventures, which possibly explains her attraction to a man who was essentially unavailable to her emotionally. I would also argue that the Smith children were drawn into their parents' marriage in an attempt to save it, first Alvin, then young Joseph. In the years before his untimely death in 1823, Alvin seemed to function almost as a surrogate husband and father. Alvin's industry enabled the Smiths to make the first 2 payments on their Manchester farm, for which he was a co-signer. He also ran the farm and took charge of constructing the family's house. Alvin's central role is abundantly clear in Lucy's history. Reflecting on the loss of the farm in 1825, Lucy states, "Everything which meets my eyes reminds me of my beloved Alvin. There is scarcely anything that I see which has not passed through the hands of that faithful boy, and afterwards been carefully arranged precisely according to his plan by his brothers who survived him." In words normally expected from a departing father, Alvin took great pains to pass his caretaking role on to his siblings before dying on 19th of November, 1823. The significance of Alvin's death in the development of Joseph Smith's career as a prophet cannot be overemphasized. The sudden loss of Alvin created a vacuum in the family system, plunging it into a period of serious instability and conflict. This is consistent with the findings of Dr. Murray Bowen, who recognizes that the death of an important child can shake the family equilibrium for years. Bowen describes what he calls an emotional shock wave, or a network of underground aftershocks of serious life events that can occur anywhere in the extended family system in the months or years following serious emotional events in the family. This phenomenon was first detected in multi-generational family research, where a series of major life events occurred in multiple separate members of the extended family in the time interval after the serious illness and death of a significant family member. Further research revealed that some versions of this phenomenon appeared in a sufficiently high percentage of all families, and a check for the shock wave is done routinely in all family histories. The symptoms in a shock wave can include the full range of emotional symptoms, from mild depression to phobias to psychotic episodes, as well as social dysfunctions such as drinking, failures in school or business, illegitimate births, an increase in accidents, and the full range of behavior disorders. I would suggest that the Smith family experienced an emotional shock wave following Alvin's death that lasted several years, and that this wave was particularly strong because of the tremendously important role Alvin had played. Within a period of 2.5 years following Alvin's death, the Smith family experienced an economic crisis with the loss of the farm in 1825, a religious crisis with the division of the family during the Palmyra revival of 1824-25, and a legal crisis with Joseph Jr.'s public humiliation at South Bainbridge in March 1826. Perhaps these events were among the aftershocks following Alvin's death as described by Bowen. One perhaps discerns the power and persistence of this shock wave when more than 3 years later Joseph Jr. tells his parents of his plans to marry because, as Lucy remembered, he had felt so lonely ever since Alvin's death. Religious discussion in the Smith household undoubtedly reached unprecedented intensity when Lucy, Hiram, Samuel, and Sophronia joined Palmyra's Presbyterian Church during the revival of 1824-25. William remembered that during this time his mother continued her importunities and exertions to interest us in the importance of seeking for the salvation of our immortal souls, until almost all of the family became either converted or seriously inclined. Lucy's pressure would have been especially irritating to Joseph Sr., since he harbored ill feelings towards the Reverend Benjamin Stockton, who was the minister of the church. In delivering Alvin's funeral sermon, Stockton imprudently intimated very strongly that he had gone to hell because he was not a member of a denomination. Joseph Sr. was incensed by the minister's remarks and ultimately, as Lucy recorded, refused going any more, either for my gratification or any other person's. Joseph Sr. could not have been happy that his wife and some of his children had joined the church headed by a minister he so despised. It is likely that Smith family conversation during this period centered on 2 issues. First, the fate of Alvin. Had Alvin gone to hell as the minister implied? Did the subsequent membership of Lucy and the others in the Presbyterian Church not imply agreement with the minister concerning Alvin's eternal destination? Or were they perhaps themselves conflicted about the matter? Regardless, the subject of Alvin's fate would have greatly raised the stakes in the debate over religion in the Smith household and would have served to highlight the differences between Joseph Sr.'s universalism and Lucy's Calvinism. Second, the authority of Joseph Sr.'s dreams, the first of which occurred in 1811, and Joseph Jr.'s first vision, which Smith said occurred in 1820 or 21. Both had revealed that all religious denominations were spiritually dead and under condemnation. When Lucy joined the Presbyterian Church, she chose to ignore the import of their revelations. Lucy's making a point that neither Joseph nor her husband had forbidden her to join the Presbyterian Church is her way of obscuring the fact that there was conflict over the matter. It only tells us that the 2 Josephs were not forceful or overtly coercive in their views, or perhaps they were aware of the futility of such an effort given Lucy's determination. It does not tell us about Lucy's attitude towards the religious views of her husband and son. However, we get an indirect glimpse into Lucy's opinion when she quotes young Joseph saying, "You will not stay with them long, for you are mistaken in them, and you do not know the wickedness of their hearts." This implies conflict as well as resistance on Lucy's part. Even when Joseph prophesies against one of the Presbyterian officials, Lucy admits she was skeptical and surprised when it was fulfilled within the year. Yet, despite the fulfillment of her son's remarkable prediction, she and the others continued to regularly attend the Presbyterian Church until about September 1828. Joseph was evidently strongly affected by the conflict in his family, especially over religion. On the night of Joseph's claimed first interview with the heavenly messenger about the plates, Lucy reports that her family stayed up late in the evening, conversing upon the subject of the diversity of the churches that had risen up in the world, and the many thousand opinions in existence as to the truths contained in Scripture. Lucy likely conceals the intensity of this discussion, since young Joseph's reaction was more extreme than on any previous occasion. His anxiety was so great that he lay awake the entire night contemplating his family's situation, whether or not an angel actually appeared. It was likely his family's religious turmoil that stirred Joseph, in the words of his mother, to reflect more deeply than common persons of his age upon everything of a religious nature. For a time, the Smith family rallied around young Joseph, sitting up late into the night listening to his stories. If Joseph wished to divert his family's attention to himself and his mission to obtain the plates, it had the desired effect. As Lucy later recalled, "We were convinced that God was about to bring to light something that we might stay our minds upon, something that we could get a more definite idea of than anything which had been taught us heretofore, and we rejoiced in it with exceeding great joy. The sweetest union and happiness pervaded our house. No jar nor discord disturbed our peace, and tranquillity reigned in our midst." 2 months later, however, Alvin's sudden death derailed Joseph's plan. Alvin's close association with the plates made discussion of the record uncomfortable, and Joseph lost his central place in the family's evening conversations. When the plates were not obtained the following year as promised, Joseph's hold on his family momentarily slipped. Soon after, Lucy and the other members of the family joined the Presbyterian Church, and the simmering differences between Lucy and Joseph Sr.'s religious views came to full boil. Young Joseph found the revival that occurred in Palmyra in 1824-25 particularly disturbing, for it succeeded in dividing his family. He and his father on one side, and his mother, brothers Hiram and Samuel and sister Sophronia on the other. Like his father, Joseph too resisted his mother's continued importunities and exertions to convert him to Presbyterianism, although for slightly different reasons. Where Joseph Sr. was decisive in his refusal to attend church with his wife, young Joseph was ambivalent. Although he wanted to feel and shout with the other family members, he said he could feel nothing. He later admitted that although he was partial to the Methodists, he was ultimately unable to make a decision in the matter. Joseph's indecision and ambivalence were likely due to the religious tensions between his parents. He may have wanted to get religion during the Palmyra revival, but the emotional price was just too high. As a result, Joseph became alienated and detached from his own feelings. In other words, caught between his parents in an emotionally painful and insoluble triangle, Smith momentarily numbed out. A major turning point in Smith's career occurred when he was exposed to public ridicule and official sanction in March 1826 for his treasure-seeing activities in South Bainbridge. During the court hearing, according to recorder William D. Purple, Joseph Sr. testified that both he and his son were mortified that this wonderful power which God had so miraculously given him should be used only in search of filthy lucre or its equivalent in earthly treasures. If the trial served to redirect Joseph's energies, his treasure-seeking father suggested a possible course when he told Judge Albert Neely that his constant prayer to his heavenly Father was to manifest his will concerning this marvelous power, and that he trusted that the Sun of Righteousness would someday illumine the heart of the boy to enable him to see his will concerning him. In August 1827, during a visit to Harmony, Pennsylvania, the scene of some of his treasure-seeking activities, and the home of his new wife, Emma Hale. Smith promised Emma's father, Isaac, that he would give up money-digging and stone-gazing. Soon after his return to Manchester, Smith procured the plates and opened a new chapter in his career. It would take years for the Smith family to achieve a measure of stability and equilibrium, but it was largely acquired through the founding of Joseph Smith's church. That the early accounts of Smith's encounters with the angel were told in a treasure-seeking context, or rather in conformity with treasure-seeking expectations, should alert one to the possibility that Smith's imposture was fundamentally directed at his father. I would also argue that Smith's emotional outburst following his father's baptism on the 6th of April, 1830, as described by both Lucy Smith and Joseph Knight, Sr., is dramatic evidence that Smith's primary goal had been his father. According to Lucy, Joseph stood on the shore when his father came out of the water, and as he took him by the hand, he cried out, "Oh my God, I have lived to see my father baptized into the true church of Jesus Christ." And he covered his face in his father's bosom and wept aloud for joy. I would suggest that Smith's relief was equal only to his original concern for his father. To summarize, I would argue that in response to the combined pressure of Alvin's death and the demand of his family role, Smith scapegoated himself in a variety of ways in an attempt to restore balance to his family. A major obstacle to uniting his family religiously was his father's dream visions, the content of which convinced Joseph Sr. to remain independent of the existing churches. Founding a new church fulfilled Joseph Sr.'s expectations, allowing him to participate without denying his dreams. While anti-universalist rhetoric in the Book of Mormon perhaps caused him to reassess his universalism, early in the translation Joseph Sr. learned from King Benjamin that those like Alvin, those who have died not knowing the will of God concerning them, were saved through Jesus' atonement. Thus, it was no longer necessary for him to adhere to Universalist doctrine to save Alvin, and Lucy and the others could belong to a church without consigning their beloved Alvin to hell. Regardless, the result was that Smith united his family within the newly founded church. Something of Smith's self-perception came through in his angry response to criticism from Brother William in 1835. "I have brought salvation to my father's house as an instrument in the hands of God when they were in a miserable situation." Smith could not give the family the social status that Alvin had, but he nevertheless managed to resolve their religious crisis and improve their worldly situation.